So we're very passionate. We're very passionate about this work, and we really want to focus on the collective trauma that many of us have experienced over the last few years with COVID, and just individual challenges and traumas that many of us have gone through. And so because of that, we've chosen to focus tonight's workshop on trauma responsive strategies to support children and teens. So that will be our topic for tonight. Before we begin, I just want to thank everyone for registering for tonight's workshop and also for submitting your questions. We did receive many questions for our presenters. We're going to try to get to as many of those as we can after our presenters provide the workshop tonight. I wanted to take a moment before we introduce our presenters to highlight one of our programs in the district. We do have a natural helpers program at our high school that we thought this was a perfect opportunity to share with those in the community who are not aware of natural helpers. So one of our natural helpers, Kayla Dengler, who's on our screen right now, is a senior at our high school, and she's going to be introducing our presenters after I just take a few minutes to talk a little bit about natural helpers. Natural helpers has been an integral part of the student support system at the senior high school for over 30 years, which is pretty amazing. Natural Helpers is a nationally certified program, and it's based on the premise that teens often talk to other teens first about issues that they are struggling with before they may go to an adult. So what the program does is, after identifying these go-to students, these student leaders at each grade level at the upper grades at the high school, Natural Helpers invest training and resources to really enhance these students' abilities to be natural leaders in the areas of mental health and wellness. So students work closely with the counseling center at the high school and with other adults and staff members to guide their friends and peers to trusted adults that can help them with tackling problems that may be too intense for them to manage on their own. So Rush-Henrietta has really valued, cultivating these student leaders, and the Natural Helpers program is thriving at the senior high school. And I can tell you, I've heard so much about it, and I've had the privilege of attending a few of the retreats, and it's a really amazing program. So I just want to thank the leadership of the program, Mike Elphick, a social worker at our high school, Jessica Kinsman, who is one of our school counselors at the high school, and Erin Fravor, a special education teacher at the high school, who are truly committed to this program and the work that they do. If you have any questions about the program or want to learn more, please feel free to reach out to any of these individuals. I want to thank all of the natural helpers who support their peers. And now I'm going to introduce one of the wonderful natural helpers, Kayla Dengler, who is going to introduce our presenters.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kayla Dengler, and I am in 12th grade at the senior high school. I'm happy to introduce the two presenters for our wellness workshop tonight. They're both very familiar with Rush-Henrietta through the district's new partnership with the University of Rochester Medical Center Expanded School Mental Health Program. Dr. Allison Stiles is a clinical child psychologist and serves as a behavioral health consultant to RH for our K-6 student population. Bri Daniels is the school-based clinical coordinator at URMC and a licensed mental health counselor. She serves as the school-based clinician in Rush-Henrietta at Sherman Elementary School. We are very appreciative of our partnership with URMC and excited to learn more about trauma-responsive strategies from both presenters. Please welcome Dr. Allison Stiles and Bri Daniels.
Thank you so much, Kayla, and thank you, Diane. We are very excited to be here tonight to talk with you all and appreciate very much having this opportunity. And I am going to do one quick thing here. We'll remove this. And okay, excellent. And then I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will get started. Okay. All right. Technology is working. This is great. Never happens. Okay, so we will go ahead and get started. We don't even need this introduction slide because we had the wonderful introduction from Kayla. So we'll jump right in. When we're starting the conversation tonight, we like to always start by really just stepping back and thinking about, right, what do we mean when we say trauma? So when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about our reaction, particularly a psychological or emotional reaction to an event that's found really distressing or highly stressful for an individual. And childhood trauma is a lot more common than many people think. So across the US, around 2 out of every 3 kids have experienced a traumatic event by the time they turn 16. So that's a lot of kids within our nation that are experiencing some kind of stressful or traumatic event. When we look closely at some of these statistics, we see that a large number of youth experience physical assault that's severe enough that it requires hospitalization. We also know that at school, about 25% of high schoolers have been in a physical fight, and about 1 in every 5 students has experienced bullying. We also know that virtual bullying is an increasing challenge across the states and across the world. And so about 1 in every 6 students have experienced cyberbullying. When we look specifically here in Monroe County, we also see that about 1/3 of high school students report having experienced 2 or more ACEs, which are adverse childhood events. And we know that ACEs or adverse childhood events are related to a whole host of negative psychological outcomes as well as physical health outcomes when there's not intervention that supports these. So to really highlight the fact that trauma is a lot more pervasive than we often think, and that the impact can be really long lasting. And so we're excited to talk with you tonight about understanding more about how to identify trauma and the signs and symptoms, and how do we intervene and help support our youth who have been exposed to trauma.
And so let's talk about some examples of potential traumatic events. We think of community and school violence. So this could be a shooting that's happened on a kiddo's street. This could be a bomb threat that happened at school. We talk about psychological, physical, sexual abuse, as well as neglect, witnessing or experiencing domestic violence. And when we say domestic violence, we don't just mean physical violence. We mean parents raising their voices, yelling, arguing. A lot of that can have pretty traumatic impacts on children. Sudden or violent loss of a loved one, especially when it's community-based. Military family-related stressors. This comes in the form of moving, right? So being relocated, or a parent or family member being deployed. Serious car accidents can be incredibly traumatic for kiddos as well as adults. Like Dr. Stiles said, bullying and cyberbullying. Sometimes this happens at school and sometimes it happens outside of school. Life-threatening illness, cancer diagnoses, things like that can also be incredibly traumatic. And most recent and prevalent currently is the COVID-19 pandemic. So we also talk about trauma on a larger scale. So this idea of collective trauma. What is collective trauma? Collective trauma is trauma that is shared by a larger group of people rather than an individual. So this could be psychological trauma that's experienced by a large group of people. This could include natural disasters as well as man-made disasters. And typically what we see is that an entire society is responding to this mass traumatizing event.
And one thing I want to note, while we're talking about stress and trauma, is that not all stress is bad. So stress can actually be broken down into 3 different levels. We have this positive stress, kind of tolerable stress, and then we have toxic stress. And positive stressors are mild stressors, they're normative, they're brief. These are things like first day of school, or taking an important exam, maybe watching something a little bit scary on the news. These are all kind of normal experiences that kids have, and they learn how to adapt and to cope with those stressors, right? Especially with the help of a parent or a caregiver to help guide them through and build those stress regulating skills. When we think about tolerable stress, we're thinking about a stressor that has greater adversity, but is still manageable with the support of a caregiver or trusting adult. So this might be something like the death in a family or witnessing a car crash, something that is stressful and traumatic, but can be handled with the support of a caring parent, and that child can help really work and through or grieve through that stress process. The last kind of stress, the toxic stress, as you can imagine, is a kind of stress that we want to try to avoid. So this is when we have more severe or chronic stressors. And while there is no benefit to toxic stress, this is something we want to avoid. There may be benefits to exposure to more positive or tolerable types of stress. So we call this stealing or stress inoculation. And so this is this hypothesis that when we have these brief exposures to stressors that are positive or tolerable, that youth can actually move forward through those stressors and learn how to cope in a better way as they move forward with their life. So with the help of those adults around them, they learn those coping skills and then they move forward. And when new stressors arise, they might be less negatively impacted by those stressors than they would have been because they've learned how to deal with these things as they come up. So what happens when we're exposed to a stressful or traumatic event? Our brain and our bodies go into this sort of survival mode, right? So we are signaled that there is danger. Our brain activates the sympathetic nervous system and tells us to fight or flee or freeze, right? Blood is being pumped to the external parts of our body. Our eyes are dilating, our heart rate's going up, and our senses are heightened. And when we have this experience, right, and the internal pieces are being shut down, okay? And so when we've experienced trauma, what can start to happen is that our nervous system gets a little bit out of whack. And so either it's extra sensitive and it can be kind of on constant high, so this sort of panicky, hyper aware of stimuli, angering quickly, or stuck on low, kind of numb, disconnected, low energy and mood. And then sometimes it oscillates between the two. And these reactions and our ability to control these reactions are handled by really specific places in the brain. So at the base of our brain, we've got this is sort of our survival brain. It controls that basic functioning, breathing, heartbeat. This is the dinosaur part of our brain. It really reacts based on instinct, subconscious, and when it perceives danger, it goes off immediately, right? The limbic brain, the middle part of our brain, is our emotional brain. And so this also gets triggered when we perceive danger, when we've been exposed to a trauma. And this links to what we feel and maybe have large reactions, right? If we have a big emotion, this center is going to go off really strongly. And this really part of the brain is, again, not a lot of thinking happening here. This is an automatic response that occurs. The outer part of our brain there, the neocortex, that's the learning part of our brain. So that's the part of our brain where the thinking happens, where our brain pauses and stops us to think rationally to prevent an impulse. So the first two parts of our brain, I want you to just think about, that's really the survival part of our brain. That's the fight, flight, or freeze when we anticipate danger. And then the other part is the learning part of our brain, which was when we are engaged in exploration, we're learning new things, we're making new brain connections. And when we've been exposed to trauma, the brain is extra sensitive to other potential dangers, right? It's now on the lookout without us asking it to be. It's on the lookout subconsciously for danger. So things might trigger that danger response, right? So a school bell going off loudly, someone slamming a door, someone standing too close to you, looking at you in a certain way, right? These things the brain is looking out for and will immediately go off. And what we think of it as like flipping the lid. So you see this example here of the brain. We've got the inner part of the brain, that's the instinct, the survival mode. And on the outside, we have the learning brain and the kind of thinking rational part of our brain. And when that inner part goes off, the survival part goes off, the lid flips open. And what that means is that no longer are we able to have that rational part of our brain, the learning brain, because it's disconnected, right? Its language has gone offline. We're acting before thinking. And so this is really helpful when there's danger and we don't want to be thinking, we just want to be acting. But when there's not actually a danger anymore, this can be, first of all, really exhausting for that individual, right? When the lid is constantly being flipped and activating all of those parts of the rest of our body and brain. And then it can also be really hard for individuals who are working or interacting with that other person, right? Because if you're on the outside, seeing these big reactions and responses over things that seem really small, and that can be really challenging to know how to respond and help that person. And the other thing to really note is that you can bet that there's not a lot of learning that's going to be happening when that lid is flipped, right? When they're activated, when our brain is activated, we aren't able to take in that new information. And so something that I want to note here is that a lot of times for kids, they often get labeled unintentionally as kids who are disengaging in school, are intentionally, zoning out, or maybe are the kids that are acting out or trying to get in trouble. Because the trauma is being missed, these kids become mislabeled. And so they're two kind of just really classic examples of what this might look like. So this first example, Joy. So her teacher brought the sixth grader to the school nurse because she was complaining of a stomach ache. The teacher was concerned about Joy's complaint and explained to the nurse that Joy had always been an enthusiastic and hardworking student. Recently, she had been not paying attention or completing her work. In the nurse's office, Joy was quiet and withdrawn and eventually admitted that she had witnessed a girl being beaten by another student that day. She was sad, frightened, and afraid for her safety. Right, so if that student hadn't felt comfortable to open up and share something that she had experienced, and we weren't looking at things through a potential trauma lens, we might see her behavior, not paying attention, not completing work, as something that's intentional, right? Like, you're making a choice not to be engaged here. You need to work harder. This other example, Alexa. So Alexa is a 4-year-old girl. She's been kicked out of 2 other preschools and is about to be expelled from her current school. She curses at teachers, hits, kicks, scratches at other students, bangs her head on the table when she's frustrated. Alexa's behaviors are most difficult when transitioning to another activity. When the teacher meets with Alexa's father, Alexa reports that Alexa's mother uses drugs, that Alexa has seen her mother arrested by the police, and that Alexa's mother often does not come home at night. If we aren't aware of these traumatic experiences that Alexa may have experienced, or if we're not, again, thinking about and asking about and being on the lookout for why these behaviors might be occurring, Alexa might be labeled pretty quickly as a student who is willfully disruptive and attempting to, bother others, to be upset, to destroy the classroom intentionally. So being able to look at these behaviors and think about a trauma lens, that question of what's happened to you rather than what's wrong with you, is a really important piece of the work that we do as adults in these children's lives to help make sure that they get the support that they need.
The next couple of slides, we're going to talk about common signs of trauma. We want everyone to remember that these are common signs, not all of the signs and symptoms, and that trauma stress may differ from child to child, even within the same family system. 2 kiddos can experience the same trauma and have very different responses. Trauma responses are also different based on the child's age. So we'll start off with preschoolers and we will make our way up to the high schoolers. So for preschool-aged kiddos, common signs of trauma stress: feeling helpless or uncertain, not having that strong attachment, feeling fear of being separated from their adult, whether it be a parent or caregiver, some anger and sadness, and even a little bit of irritability. Sometimes we see kids who come in and parents describe them as a little pricklier than before. These can be signs of trauma stress. Difficulties with sleep, difficulties with their appetite, regressive behaviors, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the next slide, and difficulty regulating emotions.
And Bri, I'm just going to pause for 1 second. stop the screen share for 1 second. I'm going to just see if it's possible. It looked like there was some kind of like writing across the screen that came up. So let me just see if this, we go back into it. Okay.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
So we'll go to our next slide. What might we see? What are some of the trauma symptoms? Seemingly small situations that cause pretty large responses. So that could be a change in routine. That can be separating from parents. These responses we may see screaming, crying, large meltdowns that are out of proportion to the situation at hand. Difficulties falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up often, or even nightmares. We may see toileting accidents, bedwetting, or some regression in those basic developmental skills. So we think walking, talking, toileting. We can see regression there. Also, we can see baby talk. Kiddos who may have a full vocabulary after a traumatic event may rely on some of that more early language versus the language that matches their chronological age. Decrease in eating or weight loss is very common with kiddos. And talking about the trauma or acting it out with dolls. Sometimes this happens in school, this can happen at home, it can also happen in therapy. When we talk about elementary school age kiddos, this feeling of being anxious, an increase in anxiety that was not there prior to the traumatic event, feeling of guilt or shame. Is there a way I could have stopped this? Is this in some way, shape, or form my fault? We see very similar sleep problems, nightmares, difficulties waking on time, difficulties falling asleep, staying asleep. In this elementary school age, we also see difficulties in concentrating. So that can be a kiddo who maybe looks like they're daydreaming, looks like they're not paying attention to the lesson at hand. We also can see a change in the way that they view the world or other people, meaning the idea of, wow, this world isn't as safe as I thought it was, or I can't trust people, I need to keep to myself. Those, again, very large emotions, which can swing from large outbursts to situations that may not warrant such a large outburst, or also the feeling or idea of numbness. This, I don't care, nothing really matters. We talk a little bit about somatic symptoms, headaches, the nausea. Sometimes in their bodies, kiddos can feel more tension, which can make muscles feel tired that they're not used to feeling tired. Changes in behavior, school performance and engagement, which we'll get to in the next slide, and sensitivity to stimuli. So like Dr. Stiles mentioned earlier, this can be sensitivity to bells that go off in the school. This can be lights flashing that could be really distressing to the child. This could be noises. You know, something falling over sounds very similar to the gunshot that happened last week in the neighborhood. So what we can see in elementary school age kiddos, an increase in worry about their own safety as well as the safety of others. This can come out as the kiddo being extremely clingy, not wanting to leave their caregivers, even not wanting to leave peers that they feel really close with. The idea of spacing out, behavioral reactions. You can have a kiddo who has not had behavioral reactions their entire time in school. They have not been labeled as a behavioral kid. All of a sudden now they're running around the classroom, being disruptive, having a really hard time settling down. The somatic symptoms, headaches, stomach aches, as well as this idea of interpreting others as being hostile. You can ask a kid a simple question. Hey, I thought we agreed that we weren't going to play with this ball right now. And what that child interprets is they're yelling at me, this is unsafe, I'm going to respond in an unsafe manner. Sometimes that can be an angry manner and sometimes that can be aggressive. When we talk about middle and high school age kiddos, while some of these symptoms stay the same, there is a shift. We do see a lot of mood symptoms. So an increase in depression, an increase in isolation, an increase in anxiety. We also still see a lot of shame and guilt.
Yes. What did you need, Ben?
Sleep problems are pretty consistent throughout age ranges.
A doodle poll?
Yeah.
On email?
Yeah.
So you should be able to add voting buttons.
It can
To just make sure you're
Yeah. Let me see.
Oh, yeah, I mean.
Just
Try.
listen.
I did try.
Is there a way for you to mute everyone, Allison and Bri? Thank you so much. If everyone can just be sure that your mute is on, that would be great.
In middle and high school age kiddos, we can see an increase in risky behavior. So this can be use of drugs or alcohol as well as self-harm, something that was not present before or maybe not have been as large of a concern before the traumatic event is now quite prevalent. Those difficulties in controlling strong emotions, that idea of numbness, and the change in relationships. These kiddos can go from having great friendships to being very, very isolated. There can be a slip in grades as well as school attendance. The view of themselves, others, and the world changes, and this idea of mistrust can become somewhat consuming. Also, in this age range, we do see denials of difficulty. Those kiddos who you want to check in on, hey, is everything okay? I'm fine, everything's fine, nothing's wrong, moving on. Those are big portions of what we see in kiddos in this age range, as well as those same physical pains that even the little ones experience. So what would we see in a middle or high schooler? Daydreaming, zoning out, looking like there is nothing going on behind the eyes. Aggressive acting out, some defiance, arguing, screaming and yelling, things that are not common for this kiddo or were not present before the traumatic event. Acting silly, like we were talking about even with little ones. Even the big kids can turn into the class clown as a way to cope with some of this trauma and stress. Avoiding things that they used to do before, schoolwork or chores. This idea of what's the point? It's not going to get better. Who cares anyway? Numbness and withdrawal. Sometimes we see kiddos who are spending more time in their room that maybe have been active participants in the family before. Sometimes it comes across as kiddos dropping out of clubs or sports at school. And still that same over or under reaction to stimuli. Physical contact can be really hard for kids. Sudden movements can be very difficult. And again, this angry response when kiddos are interpreting people as being hostile towards them.
So it can be really hard to think about the impact of trauma and the challenges that youth experience when they've been exposed to trauma. And I think something that we also want to highlight today is that there is hope. The good news is that children can and do recover from traumatic events. And something to emphasize is that the adults in these children's lives, so all of you on this webinar tonight, play a really important role in that recovery. So how do we play that role, and how do we help youth who have been exposed to trauma? One of the most important first steps is helping that child to feel safe again. When someone's exposed to a trauma, their level of experience with safety has been shaken. And so we really need to think about how to rebuild that security and safety and stability for those youth. And this starts actually most simply with reminders to your child or to that student that they are safe. And this sounds really obvious, but we often forget to do this. So especially when that individual, when that child is moving into a new situation or something unknown, or a situation that is likely to make them feel anxious or agitated, reminding them that they are safe is a really important and straightforward and powerful first step. Adults also promote safety and security through nurture and through affection, and through providing empathic reflection. So empathic reflection is something like this. A child says, I'm scared about going to school. And instead of saying, don't worry, you're fine, there's no need to be scared, we might say something like, you're really worried. I understand that. Other kids feel that way too after something scary or stressful has happened. So through this empathic or empathetic reflection, we teach kids, I hear you. It makes sense that you're feeling that way. And we're not trying to change things or reassure. So through this process, this really helps kids to know that it's okay and it's normal for them to feel what they're feeling. and that the trusted adult in their life hears them and understands what they're going through. Another way that we help to reestablish that safety is maintaining structure and usual routines. This is really important. So a return to that normalcy communicates that message to the child that things are safe and that life will go on. So sometimes it can be useful to have visual schedules that you give to your child or to that student so that they can look to that when they need reminders or reassurance. Sitting down with them and talking about transitions, letting them know what to expect is really important to have that level of predictability. We also want to make sure we're continuing to set firm boundaries and expectations. So even though this child has experienced something very stressful and scary and hard, we don't want to just let them kind of do whatever, even though that can be really tempting, right? It feels like the kind thing to do, but we actually know that we really want to continue to maintain those expectations and consistently set those limits. And we can do so in a really supportive and patient way. But having that continued expectation and those continued boundaries is actually very important for them to feel safe and to understand things are predictable. Being aware of your child's triggers is another important component. So those trauma reminders or triggers we discussed earlier, when those things happen, right, that sets off the survival part of our brain. And so if we can try to provide for advanced notice to our child, if there's a trauma reminder or a trauma trigger that we think might be coming up, if we can communicate that to the school team, having the school team be aware of what those trauma reminders might be, so that they're aware. And sometimes it can be really helpful, even for a short period of time, to develop a coping plan with your students' school team or school team, you working together with the family to make sure that people can provide those advanced warnings and make sure that that child's survival brain isn't going off all the time while they're trying to work on whatever that stressful or traumatic thing was that happened to them.
Emphasizing relationships and connections is huge for kiddos, especially kiddos who have experienced trauma. Adults are the foundation of learning, motivation, and resilience. We frequently talk about how resilient kids are, and building those strong relationships with the adults in their life, with the humans in their life, is imperative to helping kiddos work through some of the more stressful events in life. You don't have to be a parent to build a relationship or a connection with one of the students that you're working with. Teachers can do this, counselors can do this, coaches can do this. It's creating a safe and trusting place for these kiddos to share experiences that they've gone through. Friendships are also incredibly important for development in kids. Kids thrive on interacting with their peers. So really encouraging kiddos to foster those lifelong friendships, to make as well as maintain friendships, is crucial in helping them process through some of the more difficult things that kiddos can experience. How can we do this? How can family and friends help emphasize the importance of relationships and connections? One-on-one time is huge. This, what we call special time, should not be contingent on whether or not the child has a great day at school. So when we think about it this way, it's not mom or dad or coach will spend 10 minutes with you if you have a good day in school. It's regardless of the child's behavior at school or at home, we're going to take those 10 minutes to ask them, how was your day? What did you do today? What did you learn today? To build that relationship, to foster that trust again. Plan opportunities for high quality family time, togetherness time. And that can look different for different families. For some families, it's going out to the movies. For other families, it's planting something in the garden. You don't have to spend a lot of money to have really quality family time. Telling your children that you value them. I'm so proud of you for trying your hardest on this test. Thank you so much for putting your shoes away. I know that's been hard for you in the past. Really paying attention to the behaviors that they're displaying that are in line with what you may want from the child that you're engaging with. Positive praise goes a really long way with kids at all age. at all ages. Checking in on a regular basis, both at home, at school, with friends. Quick thumbs up, thumbs down, how are things going today can also make the difference in a kiddo's day. How do you check in with a kid? Checking in with kids can be really difficult, right? So we want to make sure that we're taking time to listen without judgment, right? We want to be able to empathize and validate concerns that kiddos are having. A lot of the clients that we work with, we explain to them, feelings are not facts, but your feelings are valid. All feelings are okay. So really encouraging kiddos to talk about what's going on for them. And not worrying about having all the right answers. It's okay to not have the right answer. Sometimes, especially for our older friends, it's nice to have a parent tell you, I don't know the answer to that. It can really help you connect and bond with the teenager. Making sure that you're using statements that make the child feel empowered, that make the child feel valued. I've noticed you've been really sad lately. Can we talk about that? Rather than, you're upset, tell me what's wrong. That sounds like it's a difficult time. Here are some ways that I've handled a similar situation, rather than, here's what to do. And one of our favorites is, what do you need right now and how can I help you find it? This gives the child agency. It gives them that idea of, I have autonomy over my own body, over what happens to me and my own choices. This adult in my life, this friend in my life, this teacher in my life sees that, and they're trying to help me get to that point. How can we do this in school? Families in school, we want to make sure that we're working together. We are all on the same team. We want what's best for this kiddo, whether they're at home or whether they're in the school building. So identifying a kiddo, an adult that the kiddo can trust at school, huge. We like to do it in the beginning of the school year, but sometimes now is the time when people are really starting to identify who their person is at school. Who is my adult at school? Set up regular opportunities to spend time with the adult. Again, that's not contingent on the child's behavior. We don't just want our school personnel to pop in when kiddo's having a rough day. We want to make sure that there is a strong relationship so that when kiddo is having a tough time, they know, this is my safe person, this is the person that can help me. Building relationships within the school. So think of lunch bunch, right? Or peer mentoring, things like that that can help kiddo connect with their peers that maybe they wouldn't have had that choice or option to do so before. Daily check-ins and check-outs. Again, something as simple as thumbs up, thumbs down works really well for the little kids. And for the older kids, they can send their counselor or their school person an email at the end of the day. Hey, here's how my day went today. I'd like to check in tomorrow. Really just making sure that we are emphasizing the importance of connection and relationships within the school system.
Another important piece of helping support youth who have been exposed to trauma is making sure to give them choices. So oftentimes traumatic events, they involve some kind of loss of control or loss of power. That's sort of a hallmark of many traumatic experiences that people have. And so you can help your child or your student to feel safe and to gain some power by giving them choice and giving them control when appropriate, to help them to build their own self-efficacy and self-advocacy. Really taking time to practice what we call power with strategies is hugely important. So when someone is wielding power over another person with no regard of your thoughts or feelings, that shame, anger, or other strong emotions related to that original trauma often come back. So as adults, we really want to make sure we're using our power well, right? We have a power over kids, and we really want to use that power to become a power with, modeling that relationship with that child, right? To help them to build self dignity and respect. So collaborative problem solving is one way to do this. Asking for your child's opinion and perspective and preferences, and really listening, right? And when appropriate and when we can, really making sure that we fit in those opportunities to follow through on whatever it is that they're preferencing or whatever it is that they'd like to prioritize. As we've discussed, kids and teens who experience trauma often have a harder time with regulating their emotions and their behaviors. They also have a harder time with down regulating after an event, right? For calming back down after something has set them off. And so the first thing really we want to do, right, is actually to expect this, right? Don't be caught off guard or by surprise by some of these really big reactions, because we're expecting that they're going to happen. That's really normal after following a traumatic event. So the first thing is expect those large reactions. And then we want to really try to respond in a calm and supportive way. We want to try to label their feelings aloud and help remind them that it's actually okay to feel all of those feelings, that anger and frustration and sadness are okay and actually good. All feelings are good. And so we can have these big feelings, and what matters, what's important, is that we learn how to respond to those big feelings. So what strategies we learn to manage them when they come up, or to be able to move through them and understand why we're having those feelings. Using books can be really powerful and helpful for kids and for teens about talking about emotions, talking about trauma. Having some of those books can sometimes be helpful to help normalize the experience that child or teen's going through, and really trying to make sure that we take out of our vocabulary some of these phrases like "you're overreacting," "you're too sensitive." Right? Because these responses are normative in the situation that they're in. Their brain thinks that there's danger and is having that reaction in response to the danger. And so that's not to say that we don't want to get to a place where we don't have those big reactions, right? But we want to start from a place of understanding why that's happening and that it's actually a really normal response. So when we're working on teaching kids how to handle these big feelings, how to cope with them, an important piece is both teaching and modeling these different coping skills, right? So when we're talking about coping strategies, these are things like taking deep, slow breaths, using mindful art, taking space for ourselves, and reflecting on, as a parent, what do you do to cope when you have a stressor or you have a big feeling, right? What is it that you do? Do you go for a drive? Do you listen to calming music? Do you watch a favorite show? As a teacher, what is it that you do? Or as another school staff member, right? Thinking about as adults what we do to cope with these situations is really important, not only for our own regulation, right? But also to be able to model for that student or for that child what are appropriate ways. And there's no one right or wrong way with a lot of these adaptive coping skills, right? And being able to engage in the activity with the child or teen or with the student is really important. So the more we can do it together, the better that child learns. So this can be things like doing yoga. It could be doing a coping box where you put into that box things that help you feel calm or happy. So for kids, that might be like stuffed animals or books. For a teenager, that might be pictures of friends or maybe a playlist on their phone that makes them feel good. There's no, again, one right or wrong way here, but we want to help them build their own kind of toolbox of coping strategies to pull from. Something that I want to emphasize here as well is when we talk about learning coping skills, right, these strategies to regulate our own emotions, we call that self-regulation. But self-regulation is actually also influenced by external factors, by the environment and by interactions with other people, right? And so in particular, the interactions that we have with adults, that kids have with adults, we call that co-regulation, when we are regulating each other. So part of co-regulation, or sometimes we call it mutual regulation, part of that is adults can step in and they can help children identify their feelings and they can help them to use a coping skill. So that's what we've been talking about, right? That's one piece of helping co-regulate. Another big piece of co-regulation is actually managing our own emotions, right? Humans pick up on each other's emotions, and kids especially, they're sponges. And so if we are in a place of being upset, loud, reactive, frustrated, they co-regulate and match that. If we're able to come into the situation feeling calmer, being more regulated ourselves, again, kids will match that. They will pick up on that and they will be able to better down-regulate. And if you notice that you're not in that space, I really encourage you as a parent or a teacher or a staff member, to try to tap out, try to find someone else in the home or in school that can step in while you down regulate, while you calm down, and then be able to go back into that space, right? So checking in with yourself, and it's always okay. If you can find another person, it's always okay to be able to tap out so that you can make sure that you're in a good space to be able to co-regulate with them.
And how can we support kiddos with co-regulation at home as well as in the classroom? A great way to do so is to create a coping corner, or what some people call a calming corner. This is a safe space for kiddos to be able to have those big, intense feelings while keeping themselves safe physically, as well as removing them from situations that may add to some of the stress that they're experiencing. So items that you can have in a calming or a coping corner can really depend on the kiddo that you're working with. For a lot of the kiddos at home, sometimes it's a weighted blanket, sometimes it's a stuffed animal, a beanbag chair. Kiddos that we see at clinic, we can create coping jars. It's a very simple skill that parents can even do at home. Fidgets, so stress balls, Play-Doh, coloring items, something to help you breathe calmly, whether that's a pinwheel or bubbles, or even sometimes calming audio for older kiddos. This can be in the form of relaxation music, some guided imagery. You can find a couple of great ones in some of the apps or as well as online. The Calm app is a fantastic resource for teens in particular, because they usually do have their smartphones with them at all times. So it's a really nice way for kiddos to be able to be in a safe space, have their feelings, and use some of the skills and tools they have to calm down. How can we shift negative or unhelpful views of yourself or someone else? We really want to focus on the positive. I know we talked a little bit about it with creating positive relationships, but truly catching the child being good, catching them having great behaviors, catching them having those pro-social behaviors, engaging with peers, using manners, those things that maybe we may not see in a kiddo who's really struggling with a traumatic event. Identify inner strengths. Have your kiddo tell you, what do you like about yourself? Tell me 3 things that you're really proud of yourself for. If life were a report card, what would you give yourself an A+ for? And I encourage parents to ask their kiddos that, because kids have some really awesome answers. Really focusing on the positive. So if a report card or daily report is being sent home from school, really making sure that you're focusing on the positive behaviors that happened in the school day. We like to remind parents as well as school staff that kids frequently remember the negative things that happened. They don't always remember the positive things that happened. We also want to remind the child that they are not responsible for their stress or the trauma or stressor that happened to them. They did not cause this. It was something that happened to them. And we want to ensure the child's safety frequently. So how can I help a child shift that internal dialogue from I'm a bad kid, it's my fault? When you catch kiddos saying things like this, we want to help them turn their thought process around, right? You're feeling like you're not a great kid. I see the really strong kid in front of me. The way we talk about ourselves frequently reflects how kiddos will end up speaking about themselves. So we want to make sure that we are really acting on our own strengths. It's not your fault. People do care about you. You are a good child. Something bad happened to you and bad things happen. That's okay. Shifting how we view kids in general, especially as adults. Underneath the behavior of a child, we have to really understand that they're just trying to communicate. Kiddos really are doing the best they can within the situation that they're in. So while it may not be our ideal way of communication, because communication is really hard for kiddos, it doesn't diminish the fact that the behavior is driven by some deep need or psychological response that this kiddo is having. Behaviors are all often punished, and we find ourselves thinking, why is this kid always getting into trouble? Or this kiddo never learns, when what we should be thinking is, what's at the root of this? What is this behavior telling me about this kiddo? So some of these mind shifts that we can have are going from what's wrong with this child to what happened to this child. This child won't behave properly. This child can't behave appropriately. How can I be supportive of this child? How can I help this child build the skills necessary to perform in a way that is acceptable? This child is acting out on purpose. We hear this all the time. This kid is just pushing my buttons on purpose. They're choosing not to learn. Taking a deep breath and really realizing this kid has gone through a lot of hard stuff. These are normal responses to trauma. And what this can do is not only help you view the child in a different light, but also gives yourself some grace. We get being frustrated. We're all humans. It happens. And being able to take a step back and really look at a situation through a trauma lens can give you that minute to just remember, okay, this is, the child's not doing this on purpose. The child is only functioning as well as they can given their current circumstance.
Something else that we won't mention tonight, and that's really important to be aware of, is something that we call secondary traumatic stress. So secondary traumatic stress is the emotional distress that we might feel after hearing about someone else's traumatic experiences. So it's hearing about that trauma that can take an emotional toll on us as the individuals around that person who is exposed to the trauma. I really like this quote. So the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet, right? So for many people, for people who, for mental health workers, for teachers and school staff who might be hearing on a really regular basis these very challenging and stressful, traumatic experiences that the students have experienced, can be really hard. And it can be really hard for parents too, even if you're just hearing about one child or your children who have experienced something. When someone experiences these secondary traumatic stress symptoms, they're starting to develop their own signs of traumatic stress. So you might start to notice that you are distancing yourself from friends and family, that you're not doing things that you used to like to do, that you have a shift in the way that your mood, so you're feeling more irritable or more down. You might start to notice that it gets in the way of your relationships with others, or you might sort of start to feel numbness, right? These different signs of trauma start to emerge in people who have been hearing a lot of other stressful or traumatic events from other people. And it's really important to recognize and pay attention to these symptoms so that you can find ways to help support yourself or seek additional formal support to be able to handle these things when they come up, because these are also normal responses to trauma or responses to hearing other people talking about those stressful or traumatic events. And so that really ties in with what we like to talk about, which, you know, being able to focus on ourselves is really hard as adults, right? We are always focused on our kids and our students. And also we know that we need to be able to take care of ourselves in order to take care of them, right? I like to really think about it. It's not like a me first, but a me too. And so thinking about, are your basic needs being met? Right? Food and sleep and social connection, exercise, are these things being met? And when you make a decision to take even a really small amount of your day to do something for yourself, reminding yourself, this is hard to do, and this is really important, and I need to do this for my kids, or I need to do this for my students. And these can be small things, right? Maybe it's that I need to figure out an outlet for expressing how I'm feeling. Maybe that's writing it down. Maybe that's talking to somebody. Maybe the small thing I'm doing is just being really aware of the self-talk that's in my head, right? So that is a form of self-care. That's a really important piece. The thoughts that are in our head can fuel our fire, or they can help to douse and put out our fire. So focusing on helpful and realistic thoughts. I'm doing the best I can. My family is strong. We can get through this. There is help out there, right? Those are thoughts that are going to be able to power us forward. And thinking about when we are having a really hard time, seeking out that support, whether that's informal and that's from friends and families, or if it's formal, meeting with a mental health counselor is a very important piece of this work to maintain our own mental well-being. So I encourage you all to think about, what is that one small thing, right, that I can do for myself? Is it just listening to one calming song on the way to work? And then thinking about, for yourself or for your kids who have been exposed to something stressful or traumatic, there sometimes comes a point when we need additional support, right? So some signs that we might need additional help include things like when those challenges, that impairment is constant or more severe, and that it's getting in the way of daily life. So getting in the way of relationships, getting in the way of school performance, family functioning. When you're noticing that your family is starting to live life around that trauma or around the challenges that come with that trauma, like huge behavioral and emotional reactions to things. So you're tiptoeing around it. When you're noticing that those challenges have stayed the same or have gotten worse, even when you've tried strategies like the ones we've talked about tonight. And if you're just noticing that it's just causing significant distress for your child or for your family, these are times to reach out for additional help. And it is always better to ask for help and not need it than to not ask at all. So reaching out is a really important first piece. When we think about what supports are available out there, one of the first and most important things is being able to connect with a mental health clinician for therapy. So if we've decided that we need additional support, connecting with a mental health clinician can be a really good next step for your child and for your family. We know that mental health counseling has been shown to help kids deal with the symptoms related to stress and trauma. Therapy often involves some core components, things like understanding and recognizing the impact of trauma, reestablishing that safety like we talked about, learning strategies for handling those big emotions that are coming up, and then being able to process the trauma and move forward when that's appropriate. Trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which is often called TFCBT, is an evidence-based and very well-known approach, and it's often considered the gold standard for a type of treatment for kids and teens who have been exposed to trauma. Sometimes it can also be appropriate to consider medication management, and so as part of the process, talking with your primary care provider or with a psychiatrist can be helpful. And then the other thing I want to note here is when you're trying to figure out where to start, often starting with your school team, teachers and coaches and principals, school counselors, they are there to help support you and your kids. And so connecting with them first can be a really good place to start. There is on the website, I know Rush-Henrietta's website, there is a resource that has a number of different local agencies that provide mental health services and the contact information for those. So you can find that on the website. Talking to your pediatrician is also a really good place to start when you're not sure. They are very well versed in child behavioral health, mental health, and can often help to troubleshoot, should I get connected with more formal support and where do I go? For sake of time, I won't go through all of the different behavioral health options in the community, but you can see some of them listed here in addition to the crisis call lines. And then I'm also just going to draw your attention to a few other resource slides that you can go back through. This will be all on the website, on the Rush-Henrietta website. But you see here that there are a number of trauma-focused therapy specific options in the community. This page also has a number of trauma-specific online resources and some book options. And then there are a couple of slides that focus on different resources that are more broadly, that have a whole range of different supports for parents and for kids that are excellent resources to go through. And then we'll be sharing a couple of other resources on the website related to how to support your students or how to support your child with some of the things we've talked about today. And so we will wrap up because I know we've got some good questions. Thank you everyone for being a wonderful audience. And we look forward to getting a chance to talk with you all about some of the questions that you've passed along to Diane. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Allison and Bri. So I'm not sure if everyone can see me, but I think they can hear me. There we go. Perfect. That was a lot of excellent information. And I just want to reiterate what Allison just shared, which is that we will be posting this on our website in the coming weeks, along with our 2 previous wellness workshops from last year and the year before. I also want to let people know that you can find wellness resources on our website. You can either go to rhnet.org/mh, or you can go right to our website, and at the top, you will see a Student Support Services tab. If you scroll down, you can click on Mental Health and Wellness, and we have lots of resources under there. So I'm going to get started with some questions. As I mentioned before, we'll get through as many as we can, and I may combine some that were submitted by parents and staff members. So one of the questions that was asked was, how do parents and teachers know what a typical length of time is? So for example, what would be considered normal for children to cope with stress, and when it may be going kind of too long and outside the normal time period?
That's such a great question. And I think that's one that comes up a lot, of trying to understand what's normal and what is something that dictates further support and professional help. As we've talked about, it's really normal to have strong reactions right after a distressing or frightening event. But usually we would imagine that these would start to improve or reduce after a few weeks. So if you are seeing that after 3 or 4 weeks, there's continued challenges and strong changes in behavior or changes in that child's life, that would be a good signal that it would be appropriate to seek out professional help. So we don't diagnose things like formal diagnoses of PTSD or more formal trauma diagnoses until it's been 4 weeks, a full month. So noticing, is this still continuing on in this 3-4 week range, could be a signal that I might need to get some additional support. Or if things are just very extreme and you're noticing that just we're having a really hard time with knowing how to manage this. Bri, is there anything you'd add to that?
No, I don't think so. I think it's also important to remember that, like Dr. Stiles was saying, there can be an uptick in behaviors immediately after a stressful event. And we're really looking for kiddos to hit that 3 to 4 week mark. A lot of that is so that we can do some assessments, so we can see their functioning prior to the event as well as their functioning now. But we want to give kiddos the proper amount of time to regulate on their own if they can, and if they're having a hard time, then that's when we absolutely encourage a higher level of care.
Thank you. We also have an additional question. I apologize. I'm just going to close this here. There we go. We have a couple questions actually that had to do with withdrawal with students. So I'm specifically looking at that many students and kids have become withdrawn, especially during the pandemic, and lack of socialization with peers. And a question from parents, how much should parents encourage children to socialize when they're withdrawn and don't really want to see anyone? So what is your opinion on how much parents should really encourage that socialization?
Yeah, fantastic question, because I think it, spans across birth to 18, especially with kiddos who, their whole life has kind of been pandemic life. We want parents to be active participants in kiddos' lives and encouraging socialization, and also we want to make sure that we're not pushing too hard. I'm sure a lot of people have experienced where you get 1 or 2 kiddos who you're like, you have to hang out with your friends, and they're just not going to do it. We also want to make sure that kiddos have the opportunity to do so, right? So if that's parents, for our younger kiddos, parents making those phone calls of, hey, does so-and-so want to come over and have a play date? Or parents of older kiddos, hey, why don't you go to the mall with your friend? I'll drop you guys off, so-and-so can pick you up. Creating these situations where kiddos can be social, huge for parents.
And I think too, sometimes it can be helpful to talk to your kids and really try to hear from them about what's going on, to understand their perspective. So, what is it about them not wanting to engage or being more withdrawn? Do they feel anxious about going out, right? After a long period of time of not being allowed to interact socially, even though kids have been back in school now, there's still a lot of concern and a lot of anxiety. And so understanding, is it coming from that place? Is it just that they are kind of just feeling disengaged and kind of low energy? Is it that they feel like they're connecting with their friends at school and they don't need that extra connection outside of school? Or, they'd rather be playing video games? What is it that they'd really, that their perspective around why they might not be interacting socially? Because that really drives how we help intervene, right? So understanding where it's coming from, we always start by thanking them for sharing, for validating what their feelings are and their experience. And then we can think about how to troubleshoot, how to support them in getting connected and continuing to build those relationships. And like Bri was saying, really making sure that we can find opportunities for that.
Absolutely. Thank you. So related to what you were both just sharing, you talked a little bit about students being anxious. We had a question about when anxiety impairs academic performance. What are some things that parents can do to address this? And I think some of it has to do with also partnering with the school, which you both touched on earlier. But do you have any other suggestions for what parents can do when anxiety starts to, significantly impact academic performance?
Yeah, so I think, Diane, definitely the very first recommendation would be partnering with the school. So I love that you highlighted that, because school is also seeing the academic performance, right? They probably have for parents, they probably have notified you, or parents, maybe you're seeing all the back ends of this, the struggles with homework and things not getting done. So the first step, definitely partnering and talking with your school team talking with parents, really important. The other thing is helping them to build. A lot of those coping strategies that we talked about today are actually excellent strategies for being able to manage anxiety and stress. So helping to build that in and practicing that with your child or teen, and asking them what's the thing that works for them, right? A teenager isn't going to want to sit and do deep breathing with you, but they might be willing to put in music that makes them feel calm, right? Or use an app. And so helping them to start to build some of those skills. Thinking about at home, having consistency and predictability, and kind of creating a plan for how that work gets done. So for kids who are anxious, and for lots of kids and teens, but the thought of doing that homework can feel really overwhelming, right? And there's a big project, they're going to push it off because anxiety pushes us to procrastinate and to avoid, right? And so we can help as parents to help them make a plan, to break it down, to slowly tackle each piece of it so that it doesn't become really overwhelming. Because we can't assume that our child or our teen is just going to go ahead and recognize, oh, anxiety is pushing me to avoid this hard thing. If I just do it, it's going to be better, right? We can't assume that that's going to happen. And we can assume the flip side, right? Even for adults, this happens. So I think really being able to help them build those skills and sitting with them through that is really important, and can help them really build skills that they'll continue to use throughout, if they go off to college and beyond.
Great, thank you. One of the questions that came up quite a bit that I was hoping you guys could share some insights on are, what are some strategies for children and teens who are demonstrating school avoidance behaviors and resistance to engaging in school? I know that this is a big concern in many districts, especially throughout the pandemic. So can you share a little bit about some strategies to support students?
Yeah, I think for parents as well as school staff, having grace with yourself, and taking some of that pressure and anxiety of, I have to get this kiddo back in school full time tomorrow. That's a lot of stress and anxiety on the family as well as on the kiddo. So we want to make sure that the first thing you're doing is partnering with the school, right? I think RH does a beautiful job in partnering with parents to help those reentry plans, help make it so that kiddo can slowly reacclimate to the school environment and reacclimate to the school schedule without as much anxiety or stressors of Monday morning, you're going for 5 full days. So really partnering with school, having kiddo reach out to a peer that they may feel close and connected to, seeing, hey, is this a person who can help me get to school in the morning? Is this a person who I can check in with at lunchtime and do a quick thumbs up, thumbs down? Is this a person who has an established relationship with a school-based staff member that maybe I can piggyback on? And staying in constant communication with the school is going to be your best bet for really helping those kiddos reacclimate to the school environment.
Mm-hmm. And I love that. And the only thing that I would add to is, if there are days when you try really hard to get your child out the door, your teen out the door, and you just can't get them out the door and they are at home, really making sure that there's no inadvertent, sneaky reinforcing happening at home. So making home boring. So if they're staying home, they are doing their homework, they are reading, they are doing chores, they are not getting to play video games and have fun, because that can make that wonderful home environment really the place that they want to stay. And so we really want to make it boring, and we want to help motivate them to get back to school. So just keeping that in mind on those days when you tried really hard and you just couldn't get them out the door.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for that. We have a question about social media, and I think this is also on a lot of people's minds, is do you have any suggestions for kids, especially teens, but I think we're seeing this in younger and younger children who've increased their social media time so much during the pandemic that they almost appear addicted to it in some ways? You know, do you have any suggestions for how parents can help with that?
This is a really good question. And I think, like you're saying, Diane, this is a problem across all ages and for many different families. And I think there are a couple things that we can start to think about. So we did, we swung to this place for a variety of reasons where now we're here, where kids are using screen time for a large portion of the day. So when we want to start to make change, we want to gradually make that change. So we want to taper down slowly. So if your child is spending 4 hours on screens right now at home, we don't want to just say, okay, cold turkey, you get 20 minutes or you get none, right? We want to gradually reduce. So we do want to think about making a plan, but we want to tell our child about it, and we want to do it gradually. So for example, if they get 4 hours of screen time right now, or if they get unlimited amount, then we might want to say, okay, listen, I know we got to this place. It makes sense why we're all here. I'm spending too much time on my phone too, but we also know that we need to start to spend time doing other things. So this week you can spend 3.5 hours, right? I know you love the 4, but you get 3.5 hours, and that's what we set the boundary around. And then the following week it's 3 hours, and the next, right? And so we slowly, gradually set those boundaries, and we continue to increase the restrictions. A huge thing is we want to offer replacement activities. So we can't assume that those kids or teens know what to do when that device is removed, right? If they used to know, they've forgotten. And so we really need to give concrete examples about what they could be doing instead, right? Making even a visual list for what they do during that time, going for a walk, doing a puzzle, making cookies, doing art, whatever it is, we need to make a big visual list that they can go back to. And you might need to do a lot of support and doing those activities together at first. A few other things I would just probably note: really being consistent when you're setting those clear expectations and following through. And it's going to be hard because your child or teen is probably going to push back, right? They love the screen time. And like Diane, like you were saying, there's an addictive piece of it for all of us, right? And so it's normal and natural that they're going to push back, but we need to really help them to build those boundaries, because technology is not going anywhere, right? It's here to stay. And so we need to help them to build those healthy boundaries and skills. And the last thing I just mentioned is really making sure that we're modeling those healthy boundaries as well is huge. So being aware of how you're using media in front of your children, thinking about turning off notifications or putting your phone away when you're talking with them, like you want them to do when you're talking to them, right? Coming up with family media plans can be helpful sometimes. So maybe we have a media-free time of the day during dinner, or we have a media-free zone like the bedroom, and we all put our phones in this place when we go to bed, right? So helping to model and set those in place for us as well is a really important piece of that.
Absolutely. And if anyone who's part of tonight's workshop remembers when we had Dr. Wallace, that I know he works with both of you, at our first wellness workshop, one of the suggestions he gave was parents charging children's and teens' phone in their bedroom at night, so that you take it and you charge it in your bedroom, so that it really is a hard stop, because the children, don't have access to their phone during the night. So that's another idea that we have. Thank you so much. Those are great suggestions. There was a question particular to post-traumatic stress disorder. So really kind of looking at what are some signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. So kind of when some of the reactions that children are having are raising to the point of possibly being PTSD. And then how can parents provide some support if there's triggers for PTSD?
Mhm. And so really being able to identify how a child responds at baseline versus how they're responding now. So some of the signs for PTSD, again, are changing in sleep patterns, difficulties falling asleep, waking up in the middle of the night, nightmares where kids are physically waking up screaming, changes in appetite. Some kids will lose weight because they're so distressed that they genuinely are not hungry. The over and under reaction to stimuli. So some kiddos who have post-traumatic stress tendencies will have, turning a light on can really create this panic, this fight or flight response. So those are just some of the signs of PTSD in kiddos. And I'm sure Dr. Stiles will add a bunch of signs, but also like knowing your child's triggers are going to help you deal with the triggers. This kind of ties into the idea of knowing coping skills, practicing coping skills yourself, and then being able to do some of that co-regulation with your kiddo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think those trauma reminders, really being on the lookout for them, and also asking your child or your teen if you're noticing that they're responding a little bit differently, checking in like, hey, how are things going? Is there anything that just kind of reminded you of what happened, or that made you feel uncomfortable or unsafe? Because those trauma reminders sometimes aren't obvious, right? There may be something about like a color of someone's shirt, or a certain location. And when we've experienced a traumatic event, those trauma reminders, not only do they of course set off that survival brain, but they also become something that kids are trying to avoid, right? And so being aware and being on the lookout for those is really important. In the long run, we want them to be able to, and we would expect that they would eventually be able to handle those things when they come up and not have their brain flip. But at first, really being aware of what those triggers are and helping to prepare your child when you know that they're coming is a really important piece of that. And I think like Bri was saying, and we were talking about earlier, of really partnering with the school to help create a plan when needed, so that they're aware of how to remind, give advanced warning for your child as well.
Absolutely. One of the questions I wanted to make sure we got to, I know we only have a little time left, so we might have time for maybe 2 more questions, but I have been asked this question often myself, and I know some of our staff have as well, is how can parents and staff members as well access help? Some people had noted in their registration that it's been really difficult. There's long waiting lists. I know you can't solve all of those, issues for us tonight, but do you have any recommendations for how parents can access that help if they are really struggling with getting their child into an agency for support?
That's a really good question. And I think, so this is a national crisis that we're experiencing, kind of first and foremost. everyone probably on this, talk tonight is aware of this fact, but there's a huge shortage of mental health providers, and there's a really big need for kids and teens in particular around accessing mental health services. So that piece is a huge issue that we're dealing with. I think in terms of trying to help connect your kids, there are a few different ways. So there are walk-in clinics that you can access when you need sort of same day support or immediate support to bridge a gap. So Genesee Mental Health Center, Liberty Resources, Catholic Family Center have walk-in options. I will say that right now, again, because of the crisis that we're experiencing, some of these places have put restrictions on hours or a number of people that they can see. So you can call ahead to try to understand, what the walk-in hours are looking like. But those three that I mentioned have that option for same day support when you need to get connected. If there is an actual crisis going on, you can, if it's not an immediate emergency where you need to go to the emergency department where there's imminent risk for safety, but it still is a big and challenging experience going on, you can call. UR Medicine has a behavioral health crisis call line that's 24/7, where you can talk with someone on the phone and get coached through that experience that's going on. Obviously we have the mobile crisis team, which is also a great support when we're in that space. If there's not a crisis going on and it's not a same day concern, but you really would like to try to get connected, often talking with pediatrician to try to get aware of other supports, talking with the school team, obviously. And then the other thing that we often coach families is to call a number of different places and get on wait lists for a variety of different providers, whether that's private practice or at a place like UR Medicine or Rochester Regional or other larger clinics, because you can always take yourself off of it. You can always, when they call you, say, I'm good. But being on multiple wait lists is a really important way to try to make sure that you can get when a space comes available, that you're able to get connected. And Bri, I don't know if you'd add anything from your perspective as well there.
No, I think you hit all of the, main topics. I think also remembering that when teens are feeling overwhelmed, feeling like they need a person to talk to immediately, 211 is an option. I know more so recently, there are quite a few apps that teens can download where there are therapists at their fingertips to be able to chat with, to work through some of those crisis moments. And again, putting yourself on the wait list, calling, utilizing your PCP. A lot of primary care doctors do have mental health staff in the office, and just trying to do what you can.
Great. Those are wonderful suggestions. We're going to end with this last question on a really positive note here, that came from one of our parents who registered for tonight and asked, what are some proactive strategies that parents can use to help children develop social emotional coping skills? I know you guys touched on this a little bit, but do you have any additional strategies that we can use proactively to make sure kids are developing these skills?
Yeah, so when I work with families, I will often ask parents to keep an eye out for when their child seems the calmest and most regulated. What are they doing in that moment? For a lot of the smaller kids that I work with, it's drawing. So if you can notice that your kiddo is really calm and regulated while drawing, that could be a really great coping skill to use when a kiddo is not regulated. Parents, deep breathing is one of the easiest and most effective de-escalation techniques, but also coping skills that we have for kiddos this age. You can go on YouTube and type in either deep breathing or diaphragmatic breathing, and it will walk you through how to do these deep breathing exercises with kiddos. There are a ton of really fun videos that you can watch together. Guided imagery is fantastic for kids of all ages and parents of all ages. Google is brilliant in being able to share some of those at-home coping skills you can use.
Mm-hmm. And I think, I mentioned this earlier, but there isn't a one size fits all, and there's not perfect or right way to use coping strategies or a certain type of coping strategies. So working with your child to figure out what those things are that work best. Do they need more sensory input, right? They need a lot of things going on and they need to do things with their hands, or do they need less sensory input, right? They need to maybe go into a little turtle shell, put their head on their lap and like squeeze their legs, right? And so working to try to understand what are the things that they need, because there isn't one right or wrong way. And so that can be an important piece of it. And then just one last piece that I've mentioned a couple of times, but that modeling piece of really modeling aloud what we're feeling and what we're doing to try to manage whatever that situation is. Kids are like sponges and they are taking that in even if you think they aren't paying attention. So if you are at the kitchen sink or at your work desk and you are having something frustrating going on, modeling aloud and saying like, wow, I am so frustrated right now. I'm just going to take a deep breath before I act. I'm going to take a deep breath in, going to let it out. Okay, now I'm going to try to respond to this email that's really frustrating me, right? Whatever it is, kids are soaking that up. So modeling that is a really important piece for laying the groundwork for some of that proactive strategy building.
Perfect. Well, I think that is a great point to end on. And I just want to say on behalf of Rush-Henrietta, thank you both so much. You're always a wealth of knowledge, and same with tonight. You did not disappoint. You've been a great partner for us over this year, and we really appreciate it. And I just want to say to everybody who's on our wellness workshop tonight, please keep your eye out for this to be posted on our website. And if we did not get to your question tonight, because there were quite a few questions, please reach out to your mental health staff at your buildings. We have wonderful social workers, counselors, and school psychologists across all of our buildings who will be able to support you with some additional questions that were submitted. So thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Stay healthy, and we will talk soon. Thank you, Allison and Bri.
Thank you.